According to the legends, the shroud is the cloth that his dead body is wrapped in, and because of the contact with the body of Jesus, that transforms and leaves a lasting mark on the cloth.
For 40 years, Barrie Schwortz studied the Shroud of Turin and told anyone who asked that he was simply following the evidence wherever it led. Then, the evidence led somewhere he was completely unprepared for. A single molecule, hiding in blood, that was nearly 2,000 years old, turned out to be the one thing that even a lifelong skeptic could not argue his way out of. The man they should not have called. In 1978, 33 of the most respected scientists in America needed a photographer for the most controversial scientific examination in modern history. They were heading to Turin, Italy, to spend 120 continuous hours running tests on the Shroud of Turin, the linen cloth that millions of Christians believe once wrapped the body of Jesus after the crucifixion. The scientists came from Los Alamos National Laboratory, the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Sandia National Laboratories, and the United States Air Force Academy. They were serious people, and they needed a photographer with no religious bias, agenda, and no desire to reach any particular conclusion. The man they chose was Barrie Schwortz. Born in Pittsburgh in 1946, raised in a conservative Jewish household, and one of the best scientific photographers in the country. He had no interest in the Shroud of Turin, and he made that very clear. His first question when the team approached him was honest and direct. Why would anyone want a Jewish man involved with the most important relic in Christianity? The answer he got, attributed to NASA imaging scientist Don Lin, stopped him cold. Lin told him that the man in question was also Jewish. Then he added 5 words Schwartz carried for the rest of his life. God does not always give warning. Schwartz agreed to go. He packed his cameras, flew to Italy, and walked into the royal palace in Turin, fully expecting to find brushstrokes on a medieval painting and be home within a week. He had no idea he was walking into a question that would take 46 years of his life, and that the answer would eventually come down to a single molecule hiding in ancient blood. Blood that would not go dark. The moment Schwartz began examining the cloth, his plan to debunk it ran into trouble. There were no brushstrokes anywhere on the surface, no pigments, dyes, and no coatings of any kind. Whatever was on this cloth, it was definitely not paint. But Schwartz was not ready to change his mind yet, because something else about the cloth bothered him far more than any of the details pointing toward authenticity. The blood was red, not brown, not black, red, the color of blood that had only recently left a body. Every forensic professional knows what happens to blood over time. Hemoglobin oxidizes after leaving the body, and as it does, it darkens. Days-old blood goes brown. Years-old blood goes nearly black. Blood that has been sitting on linen for centuries has absolutely no business being red. And yet there it was, on a cloth that was supposed to be at least 700 years old at the minimum, still carrying the color of fresh blood. Schwartz looked at his colleague Vern Miller, but neither of them had an explanation. For Schwartz, this was all the reason he needed to stay skeptical. A cloth with blood this color was either a recent fake or something was chemically wrong. Either way, it was not what believers claimed. He stayed skeptical for 17 more years. But even as he left the palace that first evening, the cloth had already shown the world something that had nothing to do with the blood, something that should have been impossible before photography even existed, and it had happened in a dark room in Turin 80 years before Schwartz ever arrived. The face in the developing tray. May 28, 1898. An amateur photographer named Secondo Pia was given permission by King Umberto I to photograph the shroud during a royal exhibition, the first time anyone had ever photographed it. Pia hauled a large camera up onto scaffolding, used magnesium flash for light, and exposed 2 glass plates measuring 50 centimeters by 60 centimeters. There was no way to check the result until he was alone in the dark room hours later. Late that night, under a dim red safety light, he lowered the first plate into the developing solution. He nearly dropped it. Here is the basic rule of photography. In a negative image, everything reverses. Light areas go dark, dark areas go light, and human faces in negatives look hollow and distorted. That is the consistent rule for every photographic negative ever produced. The Shroud broke that rule completely. In Pia's negative, a clear and fully formed face appeared. Eyes gently closed, a broken nose, bruising on the right cheek, a divided beard, and a strange stillness across features that had clearly endured enormous suffering. It looked like an actual photograph of a real person. The explanation is not complicated. The image on the cloth is itself a negative, so the negative of that negative reads as a positive. The problem is what follows from that. Whoever encoded that image into the cloth had to have understood the concept of a photographic negative centuries before photography existed, and had to have built the reversal intentionally with absolutely no way to check whether the result was correct. No medieval artist had any reason to work in reversed tones. No medieval artist had any way to verify one. This question had no answer in 1898. It still had no answer when Schwortz arrived in 1978. Then two physicists decided to put the image into a machine built for an entirely different purpose. The machine that was built to map Mars. In February 1976, at the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, physicists John Jackson and Eric Jumper placed a photograph of the Shroud into a device called a VP-8 image analyzer. This machine was built during the Cold War to convert brightness levels in satellite images into three-dimensional terrain maps used to reconstruct the surface of planets like Mars from orbit. Bright areas rise, dark areas sink, producing a topographic model of whatever the image shows. The problem is that this only works correctly when image brightness actually corresponds to real physical distance. In a normal photograph, brightness depends on lighting conditions, not on how far each object is from the camera. So when Jackson and Jumper ran paintings, standard photographs, and X-rays through the VP-8, the results were meaningless distortions. Then they put the Shroud image in. The machine produced a geometrically accurate three-dimensional human form. The nose, brow ridge, cheekbones, crossed arms and legs all appeared with correct proportions and correct depth. Peter Schumacher, the engineer who designed the VP-8, had no religious stake in the result. He described what came out as a geometrically correct shape he had never seen produced from any other image source. For the VP-8 to produce this result, the brightness at every point in the image had to correspond to the actual physical distance between the body and the cloth at that point. Not reflected light, but real encoded distance, recorded across the entire fabric, point by point. Since 1976, no image produced by any method has ever replicated this effect through the VP-8, and the blood, examined separately by the Sturp chemists, was about to tell a completely different story. What the blood said. After 120 hours of testing in Turin, chemists John Heller and Alan Adler conducted spectroscopic analysis on fiber samples from the cloth. Spectroscopy identifies what a substance is made of based on how it interacts with light, and their results were unambiguous. Hemoglobin, albumin, and heme-related compounds. Real human blood, not paint. But the finding that changed everything was about sequence, not substance. The blood was on the cloth before the body image formed. Under every single blood stain, there is no body image at all. The image forms around the stains without ever overlapping them, as though whatever created the body image was blocked by blood that was already there. This was confirmed through spectroscopy and microscopic examination across dozens of separate areas. Every forgery follows a logical order. You create the body image first, then add the blood. The Shroud does it the other way around, and no proposed forgery method has ever explained how. Heller and Adler also found serum halos, which are faint rings that form around blood stains when the liquid component of blood separates from the cells during drying, a forensic detail unknown to medieval medicine. Then there are the nail wounds. Every painting in the history of Western art shows nails through the palms. The shroud shows them through the wrists. French surgeon Pierre Barbet tested this on cadavers in the 1930s and found that palm tissue tears under body weight. The nail has to pass through the space between the wrist bones to hold a body on a cross. Every time Barbet placed the nail at the correct position, the median nerve was damaged and the thumb pulled sharply into the palm. Count the fingers visible on the shroud. There are 4, not 5. The thumb is folded in, exactly as the anatomy demands. The blood also carries a detail that points far beyond Turin. The second cloth. In northern Spain, in the Church of San Salvador in Oviedo, there is another cloth. It is smaller, around 85 centimeters long, and carries no body image, only stains of blood and fluid. It is called the Sudarium of Oviedo, and its documented history reaches back to at least the year 570, with written records of it being evacuated from Jerusalem in 614, ahead of a Persian invasion. On March 14, 1075, the chest containing the Sudarium was officially opened and examined in the presence of King Alfonso VI of Spain. Standing beside the king was Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, known to history as El Cid, one of the most documented individuals of the entire medieval period. This is a recorded historical event with named witnesses, placing this cloth in a specific location 270 years before the Shroud of Turin supposedly came into existence. These two cloths have never shared the same location and have completely independent histories. And yet the blood type on the Sudarium is AB, matching the shroud. Using polarized imaging, researchers found 70 points of correspondence on the front of the face and 50 on the back. The nose length, calculated from fluid flow patterns, is around 8 centimeters on both cloths. The thorn wounds at the back of the head align between them. To forge both would require creating 2 separate objects in 2 different countries, with matching blood types, matching wounds, and matching anatomical measurements, all before forensic science existed to verify any of it. The cloth's journey, it turns out, is also written in DNA. DNA from 5 continents. In 2015, geneticist Gianni Barcaccia published a study in Nature Scientific Reports. His team collected dust from deep within the shroud's fibers and sequenced mitochondrial DNA to identify geographic ancestry. The logic was simple. A medieval French forgery should show mostly European DNA, a genuine burial cloth from Jerusalem should show mostly Middle Eastern DNA. Neither showed up exclusively. What appeared instead was genetic material from across the world. Genetic markers from the Druze, an isolated community in the mountains of Israel, Lebanon, and Syria, whose genetic heritage has changed very little for thousands of years. Western European markers consistent with centuries of handling by clergy. Haplogroup L3 from East Africa. Groups from the Indian subcontinent. Haplogroups from East Asia. A 14th century forger in France simply could not have gathered biological traces from 5 continents. The explanation that fits the data is a cloth that traveled for centuries before arriving in Europe. Historical sources describe a cloth known as the Image of Edessa that moved from Jerusalem to Edessa, a major crossroads where caravans from China, India, Persia, and Arabia all met. From there, it went to Constantinople, disappeared after the Fourth Crusade sacked the city in 1204, and reappeared in France around 1353. The pollen tells the same story. Swiss criminologist Max Free and Israeli botanist Avinoam Danan identified pollen from 58 plant species on the cloth. Most originate from the Middle East. Nearly 1/3 of all pollen grains belong to one species, Gundelia turanifortii, a thorny desert plant that blooms around Jerusalem every spring during Passover, found concentrated around the area of the cloth that corresponds to the head. The DNA and the pollen draw the same map. Then in 1988, 3 laboratories announced a completely different answer, and their headline buried almost everything else. What the carbon test actually dated. In 1988, the University of Arizona, Oxford, and ETH Zurich each received a sample to cut from the shroud. All 3 came back with the same result. The cloth dated between 1260 and 1390, medieval, with a stated confidence of 95%. Published in Nature. Professor Edward Hall of Oxford wrote the date on a blackboard with an exclamation mark. For most of the world, that was the end of it. But the test had serious problems before a single measurement was taken. The original 1986 protocol required 7 laboratories, samples from multiple areas of the cloth, and blind testing overseen by 3 independent organizations. By the time Vatican negotiations concluded, it was 3 laboratories, 1 sampling location, and 1 supervisor, a British Museum official named Michael Tite. The sample came from the most heavily handled corner of the cloth, the edge gripped during public exhibitions for centuries, loaded with sweat, oils, candle wax, and incense from thousands of hands. Shortly after results were published, 45 donors gave £1 million to Oxford to create a new professorship. The first appointment to that professorship was Michael Tite. Raymond Rogers, the lead stirp chemist in 1978, thought the theory that the sample was a repair patch was absurd and set out to disprove it. Instead, he confirmed it. The fibers from the dated corner contained cotton, absent from the rest of the cloth, plus a plant-based resin with alizarin dye from madder root and gum arabic, none of which appeared anywhere else on the shroud. Medieval repairs had rewoven new cotton into the original linen, dyed to match, and sealed with resin to make the repair invisible. The laboratories had dated the patch. Rogers published this in Thermochimica Acta in January 2005 and died 2 months later. In 2019, Tristan Casabianca obtained the raw data through Freedom of Information law. The University of Arizona had run 40 measurements, not 4 as reported. Sections of the same small sample differed in date by up to 150 years across just 2 to 3 centimeters, with an agreement index of 28%. In 2022, physicist Liberato De Caro measured cellulose degradation at the atomic level, bypassing contamination entirely, and matched the shroud against linen from Masada, destroyed in the year 73. The result pointed to the 1st century. And after all of that, the one question from Schwortz's very first day in Turin was still sitting there. Why was the blood still red? The molecule that should not have been there. In 1995, Schwortz got a phone call from Alan Adler, the blood chemist who had analyzed the stirp samples. Adler was also Jewish, also a skeptic, and had spent years going back through the blood chemistry. He was calling because he had finally worked out the answer to the question that had kept Schwortz doubtful since 1978. Adler told him the blood contains an unusually high concentration of bilirubin. Bilirubin is a compound the liver produces when it breaks down old red blood cells. Under normal conditions, only tiny amounts of it circulate in the bloodstream. But when a body goes through prolonged physical torture, severe sustained trauma, and extreme psychological stress over an extended period, the liver releases bilirubin into the blood at a far higher rate. And here is what that does. Bilirubin binds to hemoglobin, the protein that gives blood its color, in a way that stops the normal oxidation process. Ordinary blood darkens because hemoglobin reacts with oxygen over time, turning blood from red to brown to nearly black. Blood saturated with bilirubin from extreme trauma does not go through that process. The bilirubin blocks it. That blood stays red, not for years or decades, but indefinitely. So the blood on the shroud was not chemically wrong. It was exactly what the blood of someone pushed to the absolute edge of physical survival would look like, permanently, because the level of suffering they endured had changed the chemistry of their blood in a way that preserved its color across any amount of time. Schwortz later described that phone call as the moment 17 years of carefully held skepticism simply fell apart. He had no rational basis left for the position he had maintained since 1978. He did not convert, though. He remained Jewish for the rest of his life, never entered a church as a believer, and never described the Shroud as anything other than evidence. In 1996, he launched Shroud.com, which grew into the largest archive of Shroud research on the internet, visited by over 15 million people across more than 160 countries. In 2013, he spoke at the Pontifical University inside Vatican City and told the audience he genuinely believed God had chosen a Jewish skeptic for this work on purpose. He died on June 21, 2024, at the age of 77, having never wavered and never converted. So after 40 years of studying this cloth, after watching the blood chemistry, the image physics, the DNA, the pollen, and the carbon dating all get pulled apart layer by layer, here is the question worth asking. If a single molecule in ancient blood can hold evidence of suffering for 2,000 years, what else is sitting in that cloth that science has not yet found a way to read? Leave your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. And if you enjoy this video, please click on the next one on your screen.